The cold did not arrive suddenly that night, it crept in like a slow sentence being written across the land, pressing its weight into bones, breath, and hope. Snow lay hardened along the fence lines, and the wind scoured the plains until even the moon looked bruised. At the edge of a dying ranch road, a woman stood wrapped in a coat too thin for mercy, her boots soaked through, her hands numb enough that pain had given way to a quiet burning. She waited because waiting was all she had left, and because turning back meant admitting that no door would open for her again. Before this story goes any further, if you believe that kindness can still survive in hard places, and that second chances sometimes arrive through the most broken people, take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with someone who needs hope, and subscribe to the channel Wild West Tale. Your support keeps stories like this alive. She had not planned to be there. Life rarely announces where it will abandon you. Weeks earlier, she had buried her husband beneath frozen ground, her hands trembling as if the earth itself resisted accepting him. He had been a quiet man who worked with his back bent and his dreams modest, a man who believed that if you stayed honest and kept moving forward, things would eventually settle. When sickness came, it did not ask permission. When debt followed, it did not slow down for grief. The small house they rented was taken, her belongings scattered into boxes she could not carry, and the few relatives she called offered apologies that sounded rehearsed. By the time winter tightened its grip, she had learned how quickly sympathy thins when it costs something. She traveled west because people always said there was work there, because stories of wide skies and honest labor sounded better than the narrow rooms where memories echoed too loudly. But the towns she passed through were wary of strangers, especially widows with hollow eyes and no references. Shelters were full, barns were locked, and every mile drained what little strength she had left. That night, she followed the fence line toward a ranch whose lights flickered faintly in the distance, not because she expected help, but because standing still in the cold felt like surrender. The ranch belonged to a man who had learned how to live without expecting much from the world. He was a cowboy by trade, though the word felt too clean for the life he carried. His hands were scarred, his shoulders bowed by years of lifting and losing, and the house he lived in was quiet in a way that had nothing to do with peace. He had buried his wife years earlier, after an accident that no one could soften with explanation. Since then, he had let the ranch shrink to what he could manage alone, letting fields go wild and fences sag. People in town said he was difficult, that grief had made him hard. The truth was simpler. He had nothing left he was afraid to lose, and that made him dangerous in a way no one noticed. That evening, he returned late, the truck rattling as it climbed the last stretch of road. He noticed the shape near the fence before he understood it, a stillness that did not belong to animals or snowdrifts. The engine idled while he sat there, weighing the cost of stopping. Experience had taught him that stopping changed things, that involvement always came with consequences. Yet the longer he watched, the clearer it became that this was not a trespasser or a thief, but someone waiting because waiting felt safer than knocking. The woman did not look up when he stepped out. The wind had taken her attention, had narrowed her world to breath and balance. She leaned slightly against the fence, using it as proof that something solid still existed. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, and her eyes carried that distant look people get when the present has become unbearable. He recognized it because he had worn it himself, standing beside a hospital bed years ago, realizing that no amount of wanting could keep a person alive. He did not rush. He approached slowly, as if speed might frighten her away or shatter something fragile between them. The ranch house loomed behind him, its windows dark, its door heavy with years of isolation. He knew what it meant to keep that door closed. It was not just wooden hinges, it was a boundary he had built to protect himself from reminders of what he could no longer fix. Letting someone cross it meant letting the past stir. The woman swayed slightly, and the motion was enough to break his hesitation. He guided her toward the house, steadying her without ceremony, aware of how light she felt, how hunger and cold had reduced her to something almost weightless. Inside, the air was cold too, but it was still air, and that alone felt like relief. He set to work the way people do when emotions threatened to overwhelm them, focusing on simple tasks. He built a fire, found blankets, poured water into a pot. Each movement grounded him, reminded him that hands could still be useful even when hearts were tired. As warmth returned to her fingers, the woman's breathing steadied. She did not speak, and he did not ask questions. Silence, he had learned, could be a kind of respect. He could see the marks of hardship on her, the way her eyes followed every movement, alert even in safety. People who have been turned away too many times never fully relax. They wait for the moment kindness reveals its price. The night stretched on, the storm pressing against the windows as if testing the house's resolve. He thought about the years he had spent avoiding moments like this, about how he had convinced himself that isolation was strength. It was easier to believe that than to admit he was afraid of caring again. Yet watching the woman sleep fitfully by the fire, he felt something shift, a quiet recognition that having nothing left did not mean you stopped being responsible for the world you lived in. Sometimes it meant the opposite. Morning arrived pale and slow. The ranch looked smaller in daylight, its neglect more obvious. He brewed coffee, set out what food he had, and considered what would come next. He was not wealthy, not connected, and the town's patience for outsiders was thin. Helping her would mean standing against that, would mean using what little reputation he had left. But reputation was a currency he no longer valued. When she woke, her eyes filled with confusion and a cautious gratitude that made him uncomfortable. He understood that look too well. It was the look of someone bracing for the moment they would be asked to leave. He explained the rules of the house without softness, because softness could be mistaken for promises he was not sure he could keep. She listened carefully, nodding, absorbing every word as if it were a contract she could not afford to break. Over the following days, the rhythm of the ranch changed. She helped where she could, her movements tentative at first, then more confident. He showed her how to mend fences, how to feed the animals that remained, how to read the weather by the sky's color. They spoke little, but the work itself became a language. With each shared task, the space between them shifted from wary to familiar. The town noticed, as towns always do. Whispers followed him when he went in for supplies. Some were curious, others disapproving. A widowed cowboy taking in a stranger was not the story people expected, and suspicion filled the gaps where understanding might have been. He felt the pressure building, the unspoken demand that he explain himself, justify why he had opened his door. The old version of him might have backed down, might have retreated into silence. This time, he did not. When confronted, he stood his ground. He did not argue or plead. He simply refused to be moved. There was a strength in that refusal that surprised even him. It came from the knowledge that he had already survived the worst loss imaginable. The threat of judgment held little power compared to that. For the woman, the ranch became more than shelter. It became proof that her life had not ended with her husband's. She began to sleep through the night, to laugh softly at small things, to imagine a future that did not involve constant movement and fear. She still carried grief, but it no longer defined every step. In the quiet moments, she felt the presence of her past without being crushed by it. Winter lingered, but it loosened its hold. Snow melted into mud, then into green shoots that pushed stubbornly through the soil. The ranch responded to attention the way people do, slowly at first, then with surprising generosity. Fences held, animals thrived, and the house felt less like a tomb and more like a place where life continued. The cowboy found himself changing too. He noticed the way mornings felt less heavy, the way the ache in his chest eased when he heard movement in the house. He had not replaced what he lost, he had not erased his grief. He had simply allowed something new to exist alongside it. That realization humbled him. As the season turned, a decision loomed. The woman had options now. She could leave, find work elsewhere, start over on her own terms. The thought unsettled him more than he expected. He had not planned on attachment, had not named what had grown between shared meals and long days. He reminded himself that helping someone did not entitle him to keep them. When the time came, the choice was hers. She weighed it carefully, aware of what staying would mean, aware too of what she might lose by leaving. In the end, her decision was not about gratitude or fear. It was about recognizing a place where her presence mattered, where she was not merely surviving but contributing. Near the end of this story, if these moments of quiet courage and unexpected kindness are touching something in you, please take a second to like this video, share it, and subscribe to Wild West Tale. Your engagement helps keep stories of humanity and hope reaching others who need them. The ranch did not become a fairy tale. There were hard days, disagreements, and reminders of loss that surfaced without warning. But there was also resilience, built not from grand gestures, but from daily choices to stand when it would be easier to turn away. The cowboy, once convinced he had nothing left, learned that emptiness could become space, and space could become purpose. The woman, once left in the cold, learned that waiting did not have to mean being forgotten. Before this story closes, we ask you to leave a comment sharing what moment stayed with you the most, or who this story reminded you of. Your words matter more than you know. In the end, what saved her was not just a warm house or a kind act. It was the moment someone with nothing left decided that standing up for another human being was still worth the cost. And what saved him was realizing that opening a door did not weaken him, it gave his strength somewhere to go. The cold still came each winter, but it no longer defined the landscape. There were lights on in the house now, and footprints in the snow that led somewhere instead of ending at a fence.